Hey guys, it's Asa from Central Iowa Fishing, and today I'm here to talk to you about spawn time bassing fishing tips and techniques. Um, every time I do a video or a review for some tips and techniques, I always write it down. So if you see me looking over, that's why. Um, Springtime, when the water temperatures hit about 62, 63 degrees, that's when the bass like to start to spawn. They turn almost from predators into just bed defenders. Um, Bass like to spawn in water anywhere from 2 to 8 feet in depth. Um, and this time of year provides a great opportunity to get out there and start sight fishing and bed fishing. And one thing to remember whenever you're bed fishing is that for them to bed, the ground surface has to be hard enough. So things like gravel, rocks, hard clay, things like that will provide great spawning areas for bass. Um, shallow, shallow flats, coves, docks, heavy cover, anything like that that has that hard bottom, that's where you're going to find them spawning. Due to lots of weather changes in the springtime, it can trigger different spawning attitudes from these bass. So, you can go from one day, you can have them just sitting on the beds, guarding it, being real finicky, and then you have another rainy day, and it causes them to start chasing baits, start moving off the bed a little bit, and day by day, what triggers them to bite can be the difference, day by day. And one thing to remember is you're going to be doing a lot of sight fishing, so don't get too close, It's real easy for a bass to get lockjaw if you get too close. If you can see them, they can see you. So now I'm going to get into the baits that I like to use during this time of the year. Many things go into choosing the types of baits and the colors of baits that I like to use. Things like water temperature, barometric pressure, cloud cover, water clarity, and precipitation all go into what I use to choose my baits. And of course, bait fish populations and anything else that's a threat to those beds is also goes into my bait selection. Every bass is different, so you go from one bass and you're throwing a bait and you go to the next, they might not be triggered by the same thing. So finding what really aggravates that certain bass is key. So you might have to switch baits a lot. Alright, now I'm going to get into the baits. And first I'm going to start out with my creature baits, and this is my go-to. Any day that it's real sunny, I can do a lot of sight fishing. These are nice and compact lures. So, and a lot of times during the spawning season, the bass will have a tendency to just bite the tail of some longer baits, or they will tend to just pick up the end of it and move it away. So I like to use creature baits and jigs. They're nice and compact, and it really gets away from them just biting the tail. They almost have to grab the whole thing. So the first thing I'm going to show you, which is technically a twister, but it is a creature bait also, is the Chompers Twin Tail Hula Grub. I like these in natural color, so this is the root beer green. And I like these because they're very versatile. You can swim these like a normal twister, or you can bottom hop these. I like to rig these with a weedless jig hook. And next I'm going to show you is the Zoom Flippin' Rodent. And these are probably my favorite spawn time bass lures. Like I said, nice and compact, but has a decently big profile. Visible to the bass, and there's so many different ways you can rig this. You can rig this in a Texas rig or a shaky head, which are my two go-tos when I'm rigging these. Texas rig preferably, it's a little bit more weedless. And next I have the Missile Baits Baby D-Bomb. Like I said, does the same thing as the flippin' rodent. And then, you know, you have your bass jigs. So, you know, just like a football head, or just one that, anything that can stand up on that bottom like this is going to be what you want to go with. And I like to tip these with a creature bait 99% of the time. These are basically bed invaders, used to trigger strikes while they're on or near the bed. So you want to cast past that bed and slowly work it towards the bed, and then once you're on the bed, you want to work it very slowly. And sometimes it might take a couple casts to get out there to hit that sweet spot on the bed, which really aggravates that bass and makes it strike the bait. The bass may try to kill the bait, they might try to move the bait, or they might just completely ignore it. Like I said, you have to change up your baits to get that certain bass aggravated. Color selection should be based on water clarity, you know, cloud cover, precipitation, all those other things, along with, you know, natural threats to the bed, like bluegill and perch, frogs, lizards, snakes. I like them because they're weedless. They're good for sight and bed fishing, but they're not too great on bad and gloomy days because you're not able to see the beds near as well, and you can't spot the beds exactly where they're at. So you don't want to go flipping this just into a bunch of moss, you know. You want to find where the beds are at and target those beds. So if you can't see the beds, then it's hard to use them. Next, I'm going to show you the tube. And I really like the tube as well. This is probably another one of my go-tos. Honestly, I like the tubes in a little bit bigger sizes, and like I said, a little bit natural colors is what I like to use. Some people like to use the brighter colors so that they can actually see that bass pick it up. But to me, if you're using the right rod and the right line, you can feel them picking it up anyways. You work this just like you would a creature bait. You can Texas rig it, or you can rig it with a tube jig head or a normal jig head. And it's weedless, good and compact, and all around a great bed fishing lure. Next, I'm going to get into the brush hogs and the lizards. So right here I have the Zoom brush hog, and right here I have the Zoom lizard. It has a bigger profile to trigger bigger bass to become very aggravated even when it's not directly on the bed. So if you're dragging it along the bottom or you're swimming it near that bed, it can trigger it without having to hit that sweet spot or near that sweet spot. You know, in some parts of the country, lizards are natural threats to the bed, and sometimes you just have to throw them something different, something bigger, something that really gets them aggravated. And slow retrievals or bottom dragging near or over the beds work the best. You can Texas rig or Carolina rig these, and they're also good for sight and bed fishing, just like the tube and the creature bait. It has big enough profile to be worked in the shallows on gloomy days. So you don't necessarily have to be as close to the beds as you would with a creature bait. Only problem is that they have more of a chance of biting the tails of these because they're longer baits and actually missing the hook. And that's why I like the compact lures. Next, I like the Ned rigged or Texas rigged stick bait. So the Ned rig basically is you're going to have like a nail weight on the bottom so that you can bottom hop it with the tail sticking up, or you can drag it and keep that tail even up a little bit. You can flick it a little bit. But what I like to do is the reel and shake technique is basically you're just going to reel it a little bit and then you're just going to shake it just like that, and that tail's going to move. You want to work it like creature bait. You want to do the same things as you would with the creature bait in the tube. It's a great bed fishing bait. It's, you know, almost every time you're using it, it's weedless. And only problem is that just like the brush hog and the salamander, the tail could be bitten and they could miss the hook. Next, I'm going to get into the drop shot. So basically what I've come to find out is that when that bait is suspending over that bed, it drives those bass absolutely nuts. And I like to shorten the size of the bait to about a 3-inch or a 4-inch, so I like to go with the Robo-Worms finesse worm. It also has the salt on the bottom, so it adds a little bit of scent. Great finesse tactic. Short enough so it limits those tail bites, and it's all around just a great bait. I also like to go with the Zoom finesse worm, and the Zoom finesse worm comes in a little bit more natural colors than the Robo worms do, and I really like the chartreuse tail that comes on it. You can rig these finesse worms. You can rig them wacky wormed, or you can use a stick bait. And if I'm going to use a stick bait, I'm going to wacky worm it on a drop shot. It's not always weedless, and you know, tail biting might be a problem, but it is a very versatile way to fish. Whenever I'm fishing, I always have a drop shot on me. Next, I'm going to get into the swim baits. Now, swim baits, when you're using them, they need to represent a natural threat to the bed, and they need to be natural colored. So things like the Zoom Rage Tail swim bait. Now this is in a green pumpkin and a white bottom, so it almost represents a bluegill, which is very common in a lot of the lakes that I fish. I also like the Yum Pulse swim bait in the green pumpkin and red flake. Also can represent a bluegill. And those are the soft swim baits. Now you can rig these in a couple different ways. You can rig these Texas rigged, or you can just rig these with a swim bait jig head. Me personally, I like to use these when there's a little bit more cover, when there's a little bit more bottom vegetation. But when there's not as much bottom vegetation, the thing that works very, very well is a hard body swim bait of a natural species in that lake. So this is the Raw Outdoors jointed bluegill swim bait. I really like Raw Outdoors. They have great products, and I like these because of the build that they have. Keeps it in that strike zone, exactly where I want it. And these work very well, very natural looking. Those bass will really try to chase after these to get them away from the bed, so you might have to cast it more than once towards that bed. But you know, any more than 2 times, that bass is going to hit this, and you know, with 2 treble hooks, you shouldn't miss it at all. Bass become very sensitive to vibrations during the spawn time. So these big paddle tails, they're going to move lots of water, meaning that's going to create lots of vibration in the water, along with the ribs that are on them. And these, when it moves, it's going to create almost that clacking when it hits the sides, which will also create some vibrations. So I like to slow retrieve near the bed or other potential spawning areas. So it can be effective in all situations. So you can fish these on a sunny day, or you can fish these on a rainy and a gloomy day. You can fish these on a windy day because of the added weight. So you're going to be able to fish these in lots of situations. They're natural looking, but you know, you're not exactly hitting the bed when you're fishing these. So that is not a bed fishing technique. That is more of, I mean, it's a bed fishing technique, but you're not actually on the bed with it. So there's two different ways to bed fish. The only fault to it is they're not always weedless, but you don't always have to be sight fishing to use them. The next thing I'm going to show you is the spinnerbait. Now this is the Lucky Strike Outdoors, just the burner spinnerbait, willow tail or willow blade, and I have this in the white color. I like to go with a little bit brighter colors, mostly because when I'm using these on rainy and windy days. On real sunny days, these can become a little gaudy to the baits or the bass. So using these on windy days, rainy days, those ripples on the top of the water, they're gonna kind of blur the sides out of it, and without all the flash, you know, you still get some of the flash, but you're not getting a tremendous amount, which might not get the strikes that you would as you would on a rainy day. When the water temperature drops and the barometric pressure drops, bass tend to start chasing baits. So using something like a spinner or even potentially a spoon can work pretty well on those rainy and windy days. And in the springtime, there's lots of weather changes, so always be ready to use, you know, a variety of different baits during the spring. It's not a great bed fishing bait, you know, you can't set it on those beds, but it creates lots of vibration, and it's great around weed lines, heavy cover, and especially stumps. If you have a submerged tree, you know, you can find a lot of those bass either on their beds at the base or at the very end of that tree, wherever there's a hard bottom for them to spawn. And me personally, anytime it's a rainy day during this time, the first thing that I throw is that spinnerbait. And last but not least is the top waters. Now, I have a couple top waters here. I have a buzzbait, and then I have the Heddon spook, and this is in a frog color. And then I just have the traditional topwater frog. These can drive bass crazy, especially in the shallows. But it's more of a hit or miss bait, you know. You can have days where you're completely killing all the bass with these, or you can have days where you don't even get a bite. So calm days work the best. You know, you get the most out of that topwater splash and the topwater vibrations. And when I'm using the spook and the topwater frog, I'll work them, you know, semi-fast until I get to that bed, and then I'll pause it over the bed. And that's usually where I get the majority of my strikes. Now I'm going to get into the gear that you're going to want to use when using these baits and when you're fishing during this time of the year. Now when you're bed fishing, say with your creature baits or your jigs or your tubes or your brush hogs, your salamanders, or your Ned rigs, I like to use a 6'8" and up, medium heavy, fast action rod of good quality. So something that is going to be very durable, but you're also going to be able to feel it when those bass either pick it up or they go to move with it. So what I have here is one of my personal setups, is a 7-foot medium heavy Berkeley amp rod on a 7:1 gear ratio Abergarcia Pro Max. It's a very sensitive rod, but again, it's very durable. The only problem I have with these is the reel seat. I wish that was a little bit different, but I can live with it. Another great brand that I used to own myself is the Fitzgerald rods. Models like the Okeechobee rod and other heavy flipping rods that they make are great for this time of the year and for any situation that you're flipping anything, really. It's a great brand, and they have quality rods. You know, and they're not as expensive as, say, G. Loomis. So I also like the Carrot Sticks medium heavy rods. Those are great rods too. I like to go with 12 to 25 pound braid, and the reason I go with braid is because it cuts through vegetation a lot better. If you're in clear water, you might want to switch up to, you know, like 15-pound fluorocarbon or 12-pound fluorocarbon, depending on the water clarity. I like to go with spider wire or the Fitzgerald rod versus braid. Or if I'm going to like fluorocarbon, I'll go to Berkeley Trilene, something, you know, that's sensitive but also durable. If I'm fishing a drop shot, so if I'm fishing with the Robo Worm or the Finesse Worm or this Wacky Rig drop shotted, then I'll go with a 6'6" and up light action rod, or even sometimes I'll go ultralight. So another Berkeley amp I have here is just a 7-foot light action rod. Very sensitive. You know, you can feel the bottom, everything you're hitting, and everything that bites. I also like the Fitzgerald rods Aqua Dream. It's actually a medium action, but still it's very sensitive. You can still feel everything around it. I like to go with 6 to 10 pound fluorocarbon unifilament or monofilament. So things like Berkeley Vanish or Nanofill really work pretty good when you're drop shotting. And when I'm drop shotting, I'm always using a spinning reel. Now if I'm using my swim baits like the Yum Pulse Shad, or you know, the three swim baits that I showed you, I'll go maybe a little bit shorter on my rods. This also includes when I'm using spinner baits and topwaters, so you know, like the Lucky Strike and the buzz baits and the topwater frogs. If I'm using the topwater frogs, I might go with a little bit longer rod, but for the most part, I'll go with a 6'3" and up medium action rod or a medium heavy rod. So things like the Berkeley Lightning rod that I have that in a 6'6" medium heavy model. It's very light. So if I'm using it, you know, as a search bait like I would with the spinner bait, I don't get tired after, my wrists don't get tired after a long day of fishing. I also like the Fitzgerald spinnerbait 6'6" rod, medium heavy, and it's also their jerk bait rod. It's a great rod. You know, you have enough durability, but you also have a certain amount of sensitivity that you want, and Fitzgerald is great at balancing those. If I'm going with swim baits or top waters or spinner baits, I might even spend a little bit more money and go up to a G Loomis E6X, which is probably the best version that they make. You can go with the IM6 too. That's not a bad rod either. I'll go with 15 to 20 pound braid, when I'm using these. Maybe if I'm using a topwater frog, I might just go with fluorocarbon, but for the most part, you're going to be moving these at a certain speed, so they're not going to be able to see the line as well. So I like to go with braid. It's a little bit more durable. And when you're out fishing during this time, bring a scale. This is a great opportunity to go catch some really big bass. I find, some people say that it's a lot harder to fish during this time of the year because those bass can just get lockjaw and they won't bite. But I find it a little bit easier because I find it easier to target those bass. They're really in those designated areas. And after you catch those bass, guys, handle them with care. When you're holding them, don't set them on the ground. They have a protective slime that's very essential to them when they're spawning. And you want to take the best care, and you want to release them quickly so that it doesn't interrupt the spawning process, and they don't stop guarding the bed. They don't get all messed up. We want to be able to have our grandkids fishing in the ponds that we're fishing now. So that's it, guys. That's my conclusion to the spring spawn time fishing techniques and tips. I hope you guys got the most out of this, and I hope you guys go and catch lots of big bass. Go and check out my sponsor, Lip and Grip. They make quality fishing apparel at a quality price. They're Florida spawned. They make t-shirts, hats, and they also make sweatshirts, and they make face shields, and I really like this face shield. You can see me in almost all my pictures. I'm always wearing it. Thanks for coming in, guys. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe, and tell me how I did.